Welcome back to Veronica Live, and we are here with our next guest this morning, and his name is Michael Waller, and his book is called Big Intel: How the CIA and FBI Went from Cold War Heroes to Deep State Villains, and he's a former operative for the CIA and a counterintelligence expert, and what a book. Welcome, Mike. Welcome to Veronica Live.
Hi, Veronica.
Well, to kick it off, you are so interesting, and you open the book. You're just a college student that's a Republican that gets to meet cool people, and so I wanted to start there. And I have a question too: is how are you fluent in Spanish that you end up in Central America? So we'll just kick it off there.
Oh. I wasn't even fluent at the time. I just happened to speak, high school Spanish. So
Okay.
I was an exchange student in South America, and they said, don't go to Afghanistan, go to Central America. So I did.
Wow. And you were in college, and all of a sudden you do end up in Central America. So talk about that. I mean, obviously to me, you were leading the charge in a crazy region at the time, fighting communism.
It was a crazy region then as now, and certainly a crazy time. It was I was a freshman in 1980 at George Washington University, where Jimmy Carter is in his last months as president, and Ronald Reagan's coming in. I was able to vote for Reagan absentee, but I had to show my ID at the town hall before registering for absentee ballot. And so I voted for Reagan, and as a Senate intern, you get to meet everybody if you want to. A lot of young kids are too shy to go around and take these opportunities. But if you go out and you start networking with people, there's no one that you can't meet. So I went ahead and I did that. And after a while, becoming a student journalist and getting involved with college Republicans and Young Americans for Freedom, I became a youth coordinator unofficially for the Reagan White House for his strategy to push back and dismantle the Soviet Union.
And growing up, how did you realize that communism was bad? Did that come from your family, or you learned that in college in all of these things that you were doing?
I learned it by being a communist dupe. That's the best way. You just get burned. I was a 15-year-old kid. My family had no politics at all.
Okay.
My grandfather and grandmother, one was a Democrat and one was a Republican, and we never knew which was which until after they passed away. So no, we had no political leanings at all in our family, but I got involved at age 15 in the environmentalist movement. This is in the late 70s, and I was worried about a nuclear power plant that was being built in our state because it was going to send boiling water from the cooling system of the reactor out to sea. And I was concerned it would destroy the fishing areas where my grandfather and my dad and my brother would fish. And so that's what got me involved. And then they gradually take us. This is in New Hampshire, so there were professional radicals who came in from California to train these new members of this anti-nuclear group, and they took us aside for what I later learned were called struggle sessions. And they'd isolate each of us, and they'd grill us, and they'd try to tear us down inside. And then they said to me, so why do you want to join this movement? I said, because I'm concerned about the environment. Isn't that the right answer? And they said, no, stupid kid. This is all about overthrowing American capitalism.
Oh, wow. And that's how you began. Well, and then I wanted to ask you, tell us some more. You tell us about your background, how you see yourself, because you are so intriguing and have done so many things.
Oh, well, thank you. It's kind of normal, actually. If you come up through this, you don't see why other people would think it's interesting because it's just kind of what you do. So my own background was I wanted to go into the CIA as a college student. I was studying Latin American affairs, but then realized all the professors were Marxist. So I switched to Soviet affairs, studying the USSR, and it was great because you had a former KGB agent as a professor. You had exile from Hungary who knew some of these old pioneers of critical theory, great anti-communist, all these other people. And you're there now at a time when Reagan is doing implementing his strategy and meeting the other people who are doing that because you happen to be in the right place at the right time, networking. So I wanted to join the CIA and serve my country that way. Well, actually, first I was in Army ROTC, but this was when the Army was run by depressed Vietnam vets and colonels who had nowhere else to go. And the Army wasn't doing anything. And so I didn't even make it to basic training. I just bailed out and I went and I joined the Contras in Nicaragua, which was the insurgency that President Reagan was backing to overthrow the newly installed Marxist-Leninist regime in Nicaragua. And I did that through my different connections made through Young Americans for Freedom and the people at the White House who set me up to say, go down there as a student journalist, which I'd started a conservative student paper at my college. And that's how it began. But then one of my professors who I was very close to, and 40 years later, we're still close friends, Professor Jack Ziak, he was an intelligence officer based out of the Pentagon. And he said, with your temperament and the fact that you're mission-oriented, the CIA will either grind you down or spit you out, or you'll quit in demoralization. Well, meanwhile, working in the Senate, I had met another Senate staffer, a senior one, on the Senate Intelligence Committee named Angelo Codavilla. And he was a brilliant man. And he said to me, you will hate the CIA and it will hate you. And I really took that to heart, but I still wanted to serve. And then one thing led to another, and through a national intelligence officer at the White House, he connected me up with an old veteran of the Office of Strategic Services. That was our World War II intelligence agency against the Nazis. And he wanted to hear my story and hear what I wanted to do. And then he gave me some walking around money. And then he told me to go to St. Matthew's Cathedral, Vigil Mass. I was a Catholic, but I wasn't a good one. I mean, he knew in advance.
Yes, I love that
knew, right?
in the book. Do tell.
This is a week before going out with the Contras, and he gave me $1,000 in 2 envelopes for walking around money, and I thought, this is pretty nice of him. Why is he doing this? And then he said, now go to church, sit in the back of the pew at the cathedral, and don't leave until somebody talks to you. Well, who shuffles up at the end of Mass with this? Well, it's a personal security detail around CIA Director William Casey, who was an unmistakable figure. He had been in the OSS in World War II also. And he had this audacious idea to parachute Allied troops and German exiles, anti-Nazi German exiles, behind Nazi lines after Operation D-Day, so that the troops could march up from Normandy all the way through France to Berlin. And these guys would organize sabotage raids and other efforts to support the invaders as they're coming in from the D-Day invasion to take Berlin. It was a brilliant thing. Everybody said
so you knew who he was, right, Mike?
Well, I didn't know that part of him. Yeah, I knew he was Reagan's CIA director. I met him.
But were you not floored? I mean, you're this young guy that, is in a Catholic church. And
in the cathedral. Yeah.
So, I mean, what were you thinking?
Well, I was like, oh, cool, there's the CIA director. I'm going to say hello. So it's Washington, right? And you meet, and he shuffles right up next to where I was standing. And I just shot out my hand, and I said in this sort of dumb way, oh, nice to meet you, Mr. Director. And he just looked at me, and he mumbled something at me, and I didn't understand it. He said it again, and I didn't understand it. And then he shuffled away. And then a guy behind him who had a military bearing, like a sergeant kind of bearing. And he said, Capitan Luque, remember that name. With the Spanish name of Captain Luque or Captain Luke. And I said, okay, fine. And that was that. And I just didn't know what to think. And the organ is playing as the recessional hymn is going. Casey's gone out the doors.
Well, and fast forward, you end up in Central America. And so how old are you when all of this, like I'm reading this in the book and I'm going, where's your mother? Does she know you're flying off to Central America to save the world?
She's terrified.
Did she know? I mean, what did you tell your mother?
Well, yeah, it wasn't a secret mission. I was going down as a student journalist and we were going to write about the Contras. And I had invited actually journalists from other student newspapers like the Dartmouth Review
Okay,
and
so you were traveling in a pack.
California Review. No, it was just two of us. It was because nobody else dared to go except one guy, Mike Johns from the University of Miami. And so we went down, and at customs they said, what's your business here? Because Honduras actually had a good border guard, a good immigration control system. They said, and I didn't have an excuse. I didn't have a point of contact down there. I didn't know where I was going to stay. I'm this kid with sort of longish hair, and I could have been a communist, because he had all these, or a dupe, because you had all these Marxist dupes going down with solidarity visits for the Sandinistas and the communist guerrillas in El Salvador, and they're using Honduras. So they were giving me the runaround, and finally I said, I demand to speak to Capitan Luque. I thought that was my point of contact. And they didn't know what to do, and they finally found their supervisor, and some time went by, and then somebody came out and said, okay, go through it. They let us through. And there was a pickup truck full of Contras outside, and they took us away.
I mean, what were you thinking? I mean, I read this in the book, and I mean, to me, you're this young spy that doesn't know he's a spy, thinking he's a journalist, Mike.
Right. I didn't have a clue. And I was a journalist. Nobody was telling me what to write. Nobody was saying what I could or couldn't say or censoring me. I just went down. Well, that was just an episode to get my feet wet.
Were you ever scared?
Was I up for the task? Afterward.
Okay.
Or you're doing something crazy or stupid, or even just a cool amusement park ride, and like, I am scared. Let's do it again.
Okay, but when you're jumping out of an airplane with a parachute, you normally have a parachute.
Yeah, I haven't done that. No, we had no parachute. We didn't jump out of planes, but we ran into situations where communists are shooting at you and stuff. So that's pretty, tough, especially when you had never gone through basic training.
Right.
Yeah, I was going to say, did that change your perspective when the bullets started flying?
Well, when you can see tree branches coming down around you, and you think, well, this is real, but you're either some people just, I guess, freak out and panic, and other people just go ahead. Or in my case, the Contras just said, "Hey, come on, get down," and then they, there was some firing back, and then I said, "Hey, can I go through your training to, see what this is like?" And he said, "Yeah, sure." So I did my basic training as an insurgent.
Oh my goodness! And how long were you doing this, Mike?
It was about 2 weeks at a time. Ended up being for 7 years. I was with them until the end of the war.
Wow. And
Yeah.
and you mentioned in the book meeting President Reagan. So talk about that. I mean, you've met all these incredible people.
Yeah, and it wasn't like I set out and tried to do it. I was just doing my thing, and then so running the working with the other guys at College Republican National Committee and Young Americans for Freedom to work on pushing the Reagan doctrine. It was a team effort. And then one day I was a Spanish-speaking guy who the White House staff knew. So they said, please come to the White House. We're going to meet at the Roosevelt Room at this day, at this time, and President Reagan is going to come out. So make sure you're dressed well. And sure enough, so I went representing the different youth organizations, and there were, I don't know, a dozen of us, 15 of us from different groups who were supporting Reagan's Central America policy. And we all had name tags on. So it said, "Hi, my name is Mike." And so Reagan didn't know who I was, but then he went around the table. We all stood up, and he shook us each by hand, called us each by name because we had our name tag, and I'd forgotten I had my name tag. And President Reagan came up, shook my hand, put his other hand on my shoulder, and just looked me in the eye, and he had that, that Reagan smile, and he just said, "Mike, I'm so happy that you're doing what you're doing. Don't give up." Or words to that effect.
I would have fainted.
So I am just hooked now. I'm not quitting this guy.
So at this, how old were you at this point, Mike?
I was 22 then.
And was Ronald Reagan a rock star to you at this point, like to most of us?
Oh, absolutely. He was the living, the greatest man alive, and
you knew that.
He'd do anything for the man. Yeah.
Yeah, Mike. One of the things in your book that I was really intrigued by was all the people that you were able to talk to through your networking that were able to give you what I'll call sage advice,
Mm-hmm.
and their awareness of what was going on, with the CIA, with like telling you, like, you wouldn't like it if you joined it, and like, oh, by the way, watch out for this colonel.
Yeah, I remember that was
Good one.
funny.
Yeah.
Colonel North.
Yeah, referring to Colonel North. So there obviously were a lot of people in Washington that were aware of what was going on, and were able to kind of help guide you or counter some of your natural instincts where you wanted to go. Is that awareness gone now? And I gather some of that was, like you mentioned, because these guys were from the OSS. They were from a different generation, and had a much different perspective and awareness of the world. Is that gone, or is that still there today?
I think it's been beat out of us. What made the OSS successful in World War II was it was hiring amateurs who didn't know what they were doing, and they had not been in a bureaucracy where they were told what they could not do, or never really told what they could do, except put on your blinders on either side and just look straight ahead and do what you're supposed to do in your cubicle. So the OSS was full of these idealists and brash people who thought very differently, and who had all kinds of different skill sets. So, like, when Bill Casey was advising the British and American generals about his plan to parachute people inside Nazi lines to pave the way for the D-Day invasion all the way to Berlin, he was wearing civilian clothes. He was only a lieutenant, but he was talking to generals, and they dressed him in civilian clothes so he could speak to the generals as if he was in a peer group, even though he was much younger. So that was a military discipline that was broken on purpose because they wanted the best ideas to go to the top.
So one of the questions I had, there's a statement somewhere in the book saying, the infection of the CIA and the FBI. I just, and your book talks about their deep state villains. I so feel that way now. I want them gone. I want them reorged, and you talk about in the book how to redo that. Why have they become the deep state villains? When you're an American fighting for America and doing the right thing, why has it gone to hell in a handbasket, Mike?
Well, it's a lot more complicated than it might seem. First, if you think of the CIA and the FBI, they're just bureaucracies. Like any government entity, it's just a bureaucracy. So it's not something we need to revere. It's not something that has to stay in its place. So it's simply a structure and a set of procedures with certain authorities run by people who have careers in mind, whether for altruistic reasons or not. That's all it is. So it can be, think of any government agency, each one does its own thing, and it's just a bureaucracy. So if you're in this bureaucracy, and bureaucracies tend to be cautious because you want to get promoted in that bureaucracy. You want to spend all your money that year because if you don't spend all your appropriated money, then Congress will cut it the following year. So even when you accomplish your mission, you search for other missions in order to justify your budget and hopefully expand your budget. And then comes the personal side of it where you want to get ahead because you want to do your job, but you always want to advance. So you're seeking to get promoted. So you will do what needs to be done in the bureaucracy to get promoted. And then you have the careerism of the more active ones. So you have the passive promotion people, and then you have the active promotion people where they really want to get ahead. So they'll brown nose their way and do anything to get to the top because they want to either get in those top senior executive service positions or they want to be able to retire with full benefits, keep their security clearances, and then become government contractors or work for some big company with a sterling record. And of course, you get your participation trophy equivalents in the bureaucracy.
No, they have those too.
Yeah, they do, and then, they have them in the military also.
Oh my God! Well,
them,
we talk about it now. They're all generals apparently because they've gone political and woke.
Veronica was saying we can now include the military in the same batch with the CIA and the FBI as far as the bureaucrat monstrosity and out of control goes.
So, Mike, do you think, I think because Obama was in 8 years, he kind of got all of his people into these places. And fast forward, you talk about that FBI agent, Peter Strzok, the one that was leading the investigation of the Russian interference and having an affair. And, so it was so political. So am I wrong that it's so political? I mean, because you're an expert on all of this.
Well, most bureaucracies are liberal. If you just look at the Federal Election Commission donation findings, they don't give you the individuals' names, but you can say X percent of Justice Department employees gave to Democrats versus Republicans. So the Justice Department is like 96% Democrats, according to just the voting records. So no bureaucracy is 50-50 the way the country is. So all the federal bureaucracies are overwhelmingly politically liberal. So they want presidents who are going to pump more money into their bureaucracies and give them more and more power, which means the central government then becomes more and more and more powerful.
Well,
so you already had the Obama people there before Obama even ran for office.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's not, people say, well, where's the smoking gun, and it's not, they don't send memos to each other on this stuff. It's a culture. It's a mindset, and that's the part that shocks me. I'm just curious, Michael, if you've been following any of this story that's kind of starting to break about the bombings, the January 6th bombings, where there were bombs found outside the DNC and where Kamala Harris happened to be, and it turns out one of the Democrat House leaders was also there, and they're talking about all these Secret Service details and the Capitol Hill police security details that apparently did not see this bomb, or if they saw it, they knew it wasn't a real bomb, and that there is some kind of narrative being developed as a plan to blame MAGA Republicans, for trying to bomb Kamala Harris and the House leadership. I'm just curious if you've been following any of that, and do you think that these agencies are so bad that they would actually participate in this stuff?
Well, John, I live on Capitol Hill, and so those supposed bombs were planted just a few blocks from where I live. So yes, I've been following it very closely. You have carjackings. You have congressmen getting carjacked just a few blocks away from Capitol Hill. Real serious stuff going on. But a bombing is different because if you look at the way the bombs were, they were improvised munitions. They'd been there 17 hours, but they had a 1 hour old-fashioned manual kitchen timer attached to it.
Yeah.
Well, I haven't made any bombs lately, Mike, so...
Yeah, but think of that. If you're going to plant a bomb that's supposed to go off much later, why do you put a 1 hour kitchen timer? It goes tick, 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 tick. You can hear the bomb. So that in itself shows that there's something phony there. And then the videos that came out from security cameras, none of the real bomb protocols were followed. You had uniformed personnel standing around the bomb. You had them allowing children walk past the bomb after the bomb was
right. I did see that.
You let the vice president-elect of the United States go into the building even though the bomb was there. This is just not, So this was extremely suspicious, to put it most mildly, as were so many other things. Like when Senator Ted Cruz asked the head of the National Security Branch of the FBI, who knew that the questions would come in advance, he said, was the FBI involved, or any of its agents or personnel or assets, were any FBI assets involved in the planning or execution of criminal acts of violence at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th? And she couldn't say no. She wouldn't say no.
That was shocking. It really was.
Disgusting.
You could say, Senator, that's a preposterous question. Of course, the FBI would never do such a thing. It didn't. It's different to say, well, we had assets in there to keep track of the situation, right? To make sure that nothing would. No, his crews specifically were they involved in the planning and execution of criminal acts of violence? But that to me is a yes.
Well, one of the questions that kind of ties in with this, Mike, is the Russian interference and the 50 plus big names that signed that letter saying that the Hunter Biden laptop was a fake story. You know, Jim Clapper, Leon Panetta, John Brennan. I mean, it just hurts my heart that I want these agencies disbanded because everybody's so dirty. So did you know when all of this was happening, did your bells go off that this was fake?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. As soon as it first came out, back when I was in graduate school, I studied under a former Soviet bloc intelligence officer who specialized in planting and spreading disinformation. And he had a whole disinformation documentation center at Boston University, which was not to teach us how to do disinformation, but how to detect it. So I knew right away that it was fake for two reasons. The first one was the Russians and the Chinese both prefer to have American leaders who are predictable in their attitudes and behavior and who are known quantity so that the perpetrators know how to manipulate them. Well, Donald Trump is anything but a predictable person.
So true.
And he has a whole new thing in terms of dealing with American leaders. And the Russians didn't want that. Neither did the Chinese or any other adversary. And that was the first. The second one was the people making the accusations themselves had no problem with Vladimir Putin. They were fine to do business with him. When the Soviet system collapsed, they were trying to save the Soviet system. When the new Russian Federation was coming into being, they helped build the Soviet gangster state. That was the Clinton administration. They built it. They were fine with it. It wasn't until Putin started taking acts against the Soros people around who were doing their civil society programs around Russia. That's when Hillary Clinton and the others turned against Putin. But she was still doing the Uranium One deal. So you had all these other types were fine with the Russian government until that point. So for them to suddenly be outraged about how the Russian government is trying to manipulate American elections, they've been trying to manipulate our elections since the 1920s, and you never heard a peep about it. Your antenna go up, and you say, "Okay, there's some disinformation about this disinformation." That was the first thing. The problem was Trump was he was actually so defensive about it that I thought, oh, maybe there's something there. So I didn't quite know, but it was my friend David Satter, who was a veteran journalist, Moscow correspondent, who was the first one to come out and say, this whole thing is a setup. And he wrote it in late 2016, early 2017. And the whole thing is a setup, and here's why. And he explained it all. And sure enough, he was proven right.
But I'm like physically ill that these big names of stature would even sign this letter. I would never sign a letter like that, ever. Why did they do that?
Now, this gets back to your earlier
the politics.
About the politics of the bureaucracies, though, and about Obama coming in, and then they were already there before Obama was there. So this is your intelligence establishment. If you look at them, and it's bipartisan. There were some Republicans on that list too, but they were, very moderate Republicans. They weren't political Republicans. They just happened to be Republican oriented, but they were still intelligence establishment. So this is where the fraternity part comes in, where you never break out of your fraternity. You never criticize a fraternity brother. Well, you can't say brother anymore because that's genderist, and you can't say fraternity because that means fraternal. But you get so you get all these guys who have. They sign a letter based on facts they haven't seen firsthand. That's one first breach with any basic intelligence protocol. And then you write it in a wishy-washy way that says it has all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation, but further down they say we really don't know because we haven't seen it. That part, they carry that way down in the letter so nobody will read it. and then they all sign it, and it's leaked to Politico, which is a liberal political website and newspaper, and then it gets the desired headline, and of course it's all timed 3 days before Biden's debate with Trump, so Biden can then use that as a prop in the debate, saying, well, just the other day, 51 intelligence officers signed this saying that the Hunter laptop story is Russian disinformation. That was the sole purpose of that whole exercise, was to help Biden during that debate. And when you're an intelligence officer, it's like when you're a retired general officer. You know, when you're a retired general, you're still under a Uniform Code of Military Justice Discipline.
Right.
And you still speak for your former service, even though you're no longer serving. And that's that way for the rest of your life. That's why retired generals, until this point, were always, for the most part, pretty cautious in what they said, because it was the prestige of the stars on their shoulders in their rank, you know, which is now devolved to a pay grade. It shows what a bureaucracy the military is, where you're not so much a rank as you are a pay grade. Really? Okay. So let's call it pay grade, a 4-star pay grade, you know, instead of a 4-star general. But that's how bureaucratic they are. But so you have these intelligence chiefs, including some who were former generals, like General Mike Hayden. So he's double-hatted, coming out now being political. So they're giving political cover to the rest of the bureaucracy, saying it's okay to be politicized as long as you politicize the right way.
So how do you fix that? I mean, can you fire your way out of this? I mean, is it a matter of firing like the top 3 layers of the FBI or 4 or 5 layers of the FBI and hopefully finding, you know, people that are not.
I mean, and you talk about it in the book, dismantling and moving, you know, different sections in different areas.
The best I've heard is move them out of Washington, you know.
Right.
Number one.
To Huntsville.
Well, yeah, and this is just to set up a sort of a basis for a discussion, because there's a lot more to it than that, and it gets pretty complicated. Because imagine if you break the quarantine of bureaucratic Washington and you spread it around the country, you're putting now central government agencies all around the country in their well-paid communities to jack up housing prices and everything else in these local cities and towns, and then creating now these new pockets of politicized permanent federal employees all around the country. Now, on the one hand, let's get them out of Washington. On the other hand, do we want to infect the country with this?
No. Alabama's Bama. They'd send them back.
Oh, I got some howls from people from Huntsville saying, "No, don't send them down here. We don't want them." But you can't fire career employees because of the civil service and related laws. They simply can't be fired. But you can abolish their positions and then give them nowhere to transfer to. So they'll have to leave government service. And if they're no longer in government service, they don't need their clearances. So strip them of their clearances. So this is one way to do it. But we need the functions we need many of the functions that the FBI performs and that the CIA performs. It's like saying we don't want any more wars, so let's abolish the military. It's just dumb.
You can't do it.
You can understand.
Yeah.
No, but you can understand how people get frustrated.
Right.
Things like that. But no, you can't. So what do we do? So you take the FBI, which has had this terrible mission creep that's gone way beyond its original purpose, always finding new enemies to fight. And you say, well, we've got the criminal investigation side of the FBI. Let's move that to the U.S. Marshals, our nation's oldest law enforcement service. It's had very few scandals throughout its history. It hasn't become as woke yet as the FBI. Move the criminal branch and the FBI Academy over to the Marshals Service, and then change the whole ethos of it. But in so doing, abolish a number of positions so that certain people are going to not make the transfer. Take the counterterrorism functions and move certain of those personnel into other agencies that already do counterterrorism, and so on down the line. I mean, if you have a ATF, which is a problem in itself, and you have the FBI that also performs ATF functions, except it doesn't collect the taxes Well, you don't need two agencies doing the same function. So let's move FBI's, firearms violations unit to ATF, and then we can turn ATF to sausage later on.
Well, I did love how your book breaks it all down, Mike. You have solutions, so I don't know if the FBI and CIA are calling you.
No, they don't. Well, some insiders say, you have a point, but your ideas are too simple. Here's the way it should be. It's like, well, this is great. This is the kind of discussion you want, because you want insiders informing, how it might work. And I did have a lot of help from people on the inside in formulating these ideas. But then there's a neat thing that people down in Florida can do on their own, and that is to make sure to pay close attention to the sheriff's elections every election year. So the sheriff is the top law enforcement officer in every county, and they're elected by the people.
We just had him on.
To the public.
Yeah, we just had him on.
Constitutional officers here. And they believe they're constitutional officers. They believe it.
Yeah, you need our sheriff up in D.C., Mike, because all those carjackings and shoplifting, it wouldn't go over.
Wouldn't be having it. Mike, just real quick, do you think we will ever have anything on the scale of a church hearing again? I don't know if you remember those from way back when, the last time the CIA was really overhauled. Do you think we'll ever see anything like that again, or is it just too far gone?
Well, that was in the mid-'60s. We need something like that again. And Congressman Jim Jordan, who's the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee and a great American, he called for this a year ago, saying we need to have a church committee to look at the weaponization of government. So that got people's expectations up high, because the church committee was Senator Frank Church, and the Senate had a bipartisan committee, but it was a very, very liberal committee with 130 or so different top-flight staffers and investigators and litigators and so forth. Really first-rate, but it was a giant, giant staff they had to do their job. Well, Jordan had heard of the church committee, but he didn't know any of the details. He only hired 5 staffers. So the House leadership didn't understand the magnitude of what they were up against. I think they do now, but they haven't appropriated money for their own chamber to be able to do these things. So that has yet to come, but you really need it when you have both houses in the right hands, where they agree with one another on what needs to be done. Where you have Jim Jordan and Congressman Loudermilk and so many others, Matt Gaetz and others, they just really know what they're doing, or they have the right instincts and they're effective communicators. You need that on the Senate side, and you certainly have senators who are up to the task. The Senator Ron Johnson, if the Senate goes Republican this year, he'll be chairman of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, and he can investigate whatever he wants.
That'd be great.
So, yes, there is hope for that.
Yeah, Tom Lee and Rand Paul and Ted Cruz. I mean, we've got a really good lineup on the Senate side that could carry the load if we would let them.
Yes.
So one of the questions I had,
a few senators to do that.
Yeah. Well, one of the questions I had for you too, Mike, was you talk about the most famous spy ever, Robert Hansen, and your encounter. And so I wanted you to just tell me about him, because I remember when that whole thing broke, because he looks like such a normal guy, and and then he ends up being this awful spy.
Well, of all the FBI agents who was interested in my academic work, and I'm not saying, wow, listen to me, I should have all the FBI people interested in what I do. It was unique work at a unique time. So what it was this was in the early 1990s with the collapse of the Soviet Union. I was in Moscow in the Kremlin the day Russia and Ukraine and Belarus seceded from the USSR and declared that it was abolished. So it was a pretty wild place to be at the time. But I was doing my dissertation work on what was happening to the Soviet KGB during the Soviet collapse and then after the Soviet collapse. So I've made contacts with a lot of Russian journalists and officials and human rights figures and so forth to be in the middle of all of this and to pull out documents and to talk to a lot of senior KGB people who were coming forward because they didn't know where the country was going to go and they wanted to land on their feet. And some of them just wanted to get things off their shoulders, and some of them wanted to brag about things they never got credit for. And so it was an amazing time. So my dissertation came out in 1994, and no one from the FBI was interested in it. And I thought, it's a real insider look at this, like no one's had. So finally, I got a call from a senior FBI counterintelligence agent who wanted to meet. So we met many times over the years, and when I was a journalist, he was providing me with a lot of material, highly, highly, highly classified material that I had no business having, and I never did anything with it. I never wrote about it. He just wanted to know, could I keep a secret? But, okay, I think I passed the test. But that guy was Robert Hansen.
So did you have any inkling he was bad, having met him so many times, and he's giving you this? Because, in your heart?
No, not at all. He was a conservative. He was a rock-ribbed conservative, anti-communist. You would think that would be the last person who would be a traitor. But so that means all of us we cannot be blind to the fact that the Russians and the Chinese communists and others, they're targeting all of us, no matter what we believe in, especially in election years, right? But if they're doing a deep penetration of the FBI to get an anti-communist like Robert Hansen, who rises up as an intelligence agent, to get people like him in the FBI, then they can operate with impunity and with total destruction.
Wow.
So I never suspected him, but he was kind of quirky. But then so are a lot of people in counterintelligence. So some of the quirkiest people are the best.
Well, what are we missing?
Well, it takes quirkiness to really succeed because how can you survive a bureaucracy if you're a go along to get along kind of guy? You'll survive in it, but you're not going to be doing your maximum to be creative because it's a bureaucracy. Whereas a guy like Hansen, on the outside, was very cautious and very quiet. He was a subtle, quiet guy. He was a nice guy, but he was kind of off, and I couldn't tell what it was. But okay, fine, he's a little bit off. I mean, everybody has some sort of off in some kind of way. So, but when he was arrested, I heard it on the radio, and I was surprised, but I wasn't shocked. That's the weird part. Why wasn't I shocked? And it might have been because, well, if the FBI is going to bust one of its own as a spy, it's probably known for a while, and they're not going to sully the reputation of the Bureau by branding one of their own people carelessly as a spy, so it had to be true.
Well, and do you think he was grooming you, obviously, by giving you the classified? I mean, that's shocking in itself.
Yes, and I think even the worst part of that was that after he was arrested, I went to the FBI 6 times to offer their damage assessment team everything I knew, including the decrypted documents that he sent me that were on my computer, so that the FBI would know what had been compromised. So if he told me, who else did he tell? And how would the FBI know that I didn't reveal it to anybody? So I said, I want to sit down and go through all of this with you. They were not interested in my laptop. They sent 2 teams of agents to talk to me about specific issues. But I said, here, you want my laptop? And they said, no. And then on one issue, when I said what I knew, they looked at each other and said that they're not cleared to know what I know. I don't have a clearance, but so anyway, so there was never an interest in that. And then another thing, too, where you have to have psychology, the right psychology as an FBI agent. Think of when the mentality inside a bureau gets such that you cannot accept certain types of facts because that goes against the prevailing social trends.
I don't like that.
This is right when politically correct was the thing before woke, but they were 2 young agents. They seemed like good agents. They were young women. And I understood, but didn't know for a fact, but I understood that they were working directly with Hansen in prison to try to get him to talk. And I said to them, first, nothing against you, but Hansen doesn't respect women, and he won't respect you. He'll play games with you. So what you should do is get a couple of old timers in there, some old school retired guys who served under J. Edgar Hoover, and busted up some real counterespionage cases. And you might get a lot more out of Hansen that way. Well, I was told that was never done because that would be sexist.
Oh my gosh.
So just a quick one, Mike, because you've been out in the field and understand, human intel and everything. Do you think that the system today where you have all these analysts and stuff, we don't seem to do human intel anymore on the ground? It's all analysis by, computer stuff and people sitting in a cubicle somewhere, looking at a spy photo or reading a paper, or something. And it just seems that we lack the curiosity that you really need to get in there to find out what's going on in a lot of cases. Is that just something that the nature of what we've become? Everything's politically correct now.
Yes, it's politically correct, and we rely too much on technology. Well, first, the technology we have is amazing technology, but it's not everything. So you really need to know people, and you really need to know individuals, and you really need to rely on people from other countries who know the culture. But in so doing, your own people need to know the culture without being part of the culture to the point they have families there where they might have a dual loyalty problem. So because of the way that the system is built with careerism, and you're rotating in and out of countries if you're an intelligence officer or a diplomat, you can't stay and build the expertise and the personal networks that the way the British did when they were so successful. So you can't have somebody move to, say, Morocco, live there all his life running a business, get to know everybody, speak the local dialects, get to know the families of everybody, and just be that person who the go-to person who's collecting all this and building these lifelong relationships, because that's not how the bureaucratic machine works. You always have to be rotated through, and then you always have to hit certain benchmarks in order to get promoted. And there's even more box checking now, where in the FBI, as Steve Friend, a special agent who was in the Jacksonville office, as he has shown, they have a whole new matrix for what you need to, what every field office needs to do. So it needs to bust down so many doors. So you can literally knock on somebody's door and make a deal with somebody's lawyer, but no, you have to bust down a certain number of doors every quarter or every year for the special agent in charge to get his bonus. Literally, you have to do a certain number of wiretaps every quarter or every year, when oftentimes most people are happy to talk to the FBI, or they were until recently. So no, why call somebody on the phone when you can wiretap them, and then that goes on your check?
Yeah.
And then the special agent in charge gets his bonus. So it's become crazy to be this box checking exercise for really only the purpose of not assessing effectiveness, but for the purpose of determining who gets promoted and who gets their bonuses.
That's awful. So what does the 2024 election mean to you? I'm just so concerned because the FBI and the CIA, they seem messed up to me. It needs to be fixed. If we don't get Trump in there, is that even possible?
Well, first, and this drives certain people nuts, because they say if this was true, then things would be different. There are a lot of really fine people in the FBI and the CIA, and they're really doing their jobs, or they would do their jobs if they were allowed to. And they're there, and for as long as they're there, that there's hope for those institutions. The problem is that the recruitment since Obama has been going for the liberal left and now woke. So go to @FBI jobs on Twitter, and you see the woke recruitment ads that they're running.
Yep, the DEI stuff, killing everything.
Yeah, exactly, and like the military and like the CIA too, but not as overtly. So they're looking to populate the whole bureau or the whole agency with woke lunatics. Now, if you subscribe to DEI, then you don't believe in the good things about the founding of our country. So the founders of our country are racist, sexist Christian men, and they want to repress us. And then our whole constitutional system is racist and sexist and white-controlled, means of keeping dominance. So it's bad. So let's consider it as a living document that we can interpret however we wish. See, that way they're not overthrowing the Constitution, which is a crime. They're subverting the Constitution, which is not a crime. So there's a recruitment of people who think this way, and that the fight is against ourselves more than it's against foreign adversaries and foreign enemies. So you have then sworn law enforcement officers and intelligence officers and analysts who think the United States is fundamentally a bad country. What are they defending? Why would we want them there? So they're populating from below, and as they have been since it actually began under Bush, just by happenstance when he was expanding everything after 9/11. The Obama people come in, he puts leaders in there then at the top to pull up and to elevate through the central nervous system of the management system, to elevate these woke DEI, critical theory type people. And so they're running the whole nervous system of the CIA and the FBI. Trump didn't understand the problem, and he thought, well, I'll just peel off the top, 2 or 3 levels, like he did with Comey and McCabe and Peter Strzok. And then everybody will jump into the line. Well, that's not how it works. So it really continued under Trump and then through 4 years of Biden. So now we'll have had 16 years of this. 16 years is more than halfway through a government employee's professional career. So their mid-level careerists now, when they join this junior level one, they're going to be senior level in the next administration, which means the whole institutions are going to be completely captured, and there won't be an ability to make change unless we have a new president this year who wants to do it. And if Donald Trump is elected, he has to have a real plan, not a slogan.
Well,
a real action plan. As if you're executing a military operation.
Well, I think the plan is in Big Intel by J. Michael Waller, and you can find the book on Amazon.com. And we've kept you over. I owe you a bourbon or a beer when I'm in D.C. because the book is amazing, and we got to have you back because, wow. I mean, honestly, you've been able to, live the dream on your own, working in these intel and everything that you do, writing. And so the book is brilliant, Mike.
Well, thank you. And Veronica and John, it's been great being with both of you. And obviously there's a lot more that's not in the book, but it's just a start and to get a national discussion, because it's easy to lift up our hands in despair. But no, the sheriffs can do a lot at the local level. And the right president can do a lot at the top. And when you have them both working together, we can help fix this mess.
Well, we'll have you back, and we want everybody, J. Michael Waller. The book is called Big Intel, How the CIA and FBI Went from Cold War Heroes to Deep State Villains. Thanks, Mike, for coming on Veronica Live.
Thank you.
And we'll be right back.